Copper Bend, at the height of a blazing noon, dust swirled around people's feet, the heat shimmering and warping the view into the distance. On a rickety wooden platform, a farmer shouted to a laughing crowd, "Buy a cow and get a working Apache woman for free." Laughter cracked through the air like a whip. Beside the skinny cow stood the Apache girl, nearly 6 feet 3 inches tall, muscles rippling beneath her sun-darkened skin. Faint rope marks were still visible on her wrists. Her buckskin dress hung in tatters, her cracked feet buried in sand. Thick black hair fell over half her face, but her eyes were hollow, the gaze of someone who had stopped believing in humanity. Then the crowd parted. A man stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, in a sweat-stained old leather coat. Cole Danner, a rancher who lived alone on the edge of the desert. Without a word, he threw a pouch of silver onto the table. "I'll take both, the cow and the girl." No one understood why. Cole did not touch her. He only untied the rope from her wrists and said softly, "Let's go." Amid the whistles and jeers, he led his horse out of town. The Apache girl followed in silence, her bare feet burning on the hot ground, their shadows stretching long across the red dust. By the time their figures disappeared beyond the ridge, the townsfolk were still talking. None of them knew in that very moment, the West had just witnessed a small transaction that would forever alter 2 lives. That afternoon, they arrived at Cole Danner's cabin, a small wooden house nestled in the drylands, where the wind blew all day like the desert's endless sigh. The horse stopped beside a dried-up well, red dust swirling around them like a curtain dividing 2 worlds. Cole led the cow into the pen, took off the saddle, and splashed his face with the last scoop of water left. He did not turn to look at the Apache girl. She stood a few steps away, tall, broad-shouldered, her sun-browned muscles streaked with dried sweat and dust that had turned to clay. She did not know whether to run or wait for orders. Every instinct of someone treated like a piece of property told her, "Trust no one." Cole simply said, his voice low and rough, "There's bread and water in the house. Eat." Then he stepped onto the porch and knelt down to sort through the pile of damp firewood. That night, the cabin was so quiet you could hear the insects chewing the wood. Taya, that was her name, ate slowly, tiny bites, her eyes always watching the strange man. When she opened the door to peek outside, he was already lying on the floor, right by the entrance, a Winchester rifle resting at his side, not to threaten but to guard, to protect. The only bed in the cabin remained untouched. It was meant for her. Taya did not sleep at all that night. She listened to the wind hissing through the cracks in the door, the soft breaths of the horse in the stall, and the steady breathing of Cole in the corner. No words were spoken, but between the 2 of them was a silence that felt different, not hatred, but a kind of test. At dawn, as the first light cut through the curtain, Cole got up, rekindled the fire, and handed her a glass of water. "If you want to leave, go when it's light enough," he said. Copper Bend is 30 miles east, or about 48 kilometers. Then he quietly led his horse out to the field. Taya watched him go. No one had ever given her a choice. No one had ever given her freedom, not even in words. Her hand tightened slightly around the glass. In those black eyes, the emptiness from the night before had started to shift, as if, in the dry wind, a tiny seed had just been planted in the earth. 3 days passed. The desert around the cabin was still dry and unforgiving, but inside that small wooden house, the air had changed. Cole Danner woke early each day, heading out to the fields while the sky was still a pale gray blue, leaving behind the tall Apache woman standing silently on the porch, watching the sun rise. At first, Taya simply sat, looking around, her hands unsure of what to do. But Cole's gaze, calm, never probing, made her feel strangely uneasy. Not because she was afraid, but because he did not look at her like other men did. Not like an object, not like a wild thing, but like a human being who had lost her way. On the 4th midday, she stepped into the kitchen, found a dull knife and some cornmeal. Taya lit a fire, moving carefully, like someone relearning how to live. When the smell of burnt bread filled the room, Cole returned, stood in the doorway, and said nothing. She thought he would scold her, but he only lifted the pan off the fire, then gave a small nod. Everyone's first time is like that. That afternoon, she followed him to the cattle pen. The fence had collapsed during a storm last season. Cole was silently rebuilding it. Without being told, Taya bent down and lifted a beam twice the weight of an average man. Her arms tensed, veins standing out, muscles shifting under her sun-darkened skin like water flowing beneath the surface. Cole glanced over. His eyes changed, just slightly. Not admiration, not fear, but respect. That night, on the porch, a new pair of leather boots waited large size, thick soles. No words attached. She tried them on. They fit perfectly. Feet once hardened by calluses were now shielded from the burning sand. That night, Taya sat by the door, listening to the soft hum of crickets. She thought of the days when she was dragged by ropes, forced to bow under the weight of contemptuous stares. Now, no one gave orders. No one struck her. There was only one man, quietly living through his day, letting her mend her dress and slowly stitch her soul back together. In the flickering firelight, she held a needle, sewing up the tattered buckskin dress, each stitch like mending a piece of her past. Across the room, Cole lay on the floor. His eyes glanced her way, then closed. Taya realized for the first time, the fear inside her no longer filled the whole room. Outside, the desert wind still blew, but inside that small cabin, the silence had changed from desolate to peaceful. Rumors do not need wind to fly. A week later, Copper Bend buzzed like a hornet's nest. People said, Danner brought back an Apache woman built like a man. He must have lost his mind. Maybe he's using her to scare off wolves. Or to warm his bed? Snide remarks drifted through the saloon with the whiskey smoke, spreading down the red dust road. Cole Danner heard them when he went into town to buy salt and nails. He said nothing. Just nodded, paid, and rode his horse back toward the cabin. Taya stayed behind at the ranch, quietly going on with her work, mending shirts, chopping wood, tending to the cattle. That afternoon, 3 men on horseback arrived, faces flushed with drink and the smell of gunpowder. Hey, Danner, the bald one croaked with a grin. We heard you're keeping a wild thing here. Let's have a look. Cole stepped out onto the porch. The sunlight hit his sun-browned face, revealing a faint scar across his jaw. He did not reach for his gun. He simply said, steady and low, "There's nothing to see here. Get off my land." Another man laughed, spit out some beer foam. You protecting her? That Apache's gonna bite you one of these days. Cole narrowed his eyes, gaze cold as steel. She is here because she chooses to be. No one forced her. And no one lays a hand on her. The silence was heavy as stone. The 3 men exchanged glances, let out short, bitter laughs, then turned their horses and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Inside the cabin, Taya stood behind the curtain. Her strong shoulders were still tense, but in her eyes, something had shifted trust. Not because Cole had defeated someone, but because he had stood by her without needing a reason. That evening, Taya carried water to the trough, quietly pouring it out for the horse. Cole glanced over, nodded once, then went back to fixing the fence. No words passed between them, but the silence was no longer like before. It was no longer fear, but companionship. As the sunset spilled over the hills, the red light swept through the cabin window, catching Taya's face. For the first time, she smiled. A small smile, but real. Cole saw it and gave a slight nod. No words, no hidden meanings, just an acknowledgement that, sometimes, trust does not need to be spoken aloud. It only needs someone willing to stay still. When the whole world walks away, thank you, truly, for being here with me. Let us know where you are listening from. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel to support my work. I wish you peace and happiness. Wherever in the world you may be hearing this story, the days that followed drifted by in a different kind of silence. Not the silence of fear, but of 2 people learning how to exist together. Each morning, Cole rose early to boil coffee. Taya stepped outside to tie up the horse, her large hands moving the rope with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. She still spoke little, but every movement was precise and steady. The early sun cast a soft golden layer over her shoulders. Beads of sweat traced down her darkened muscles, glinting with the firelight from the porch stove. Cole hammered nails into the fence. She carried lumber. No one gave orders. Now and then, they exchanged short words. Nails over there. Hand me that. Watch your hand. But in their voices, the distance was gone, only the steady rhythm remained, of 2 people working for the same home. In the evenings, they sat by the door, eating burnt cornbread and stewed beans. Cole spoke a few words about the old battlefield, where men killed each other over a strip of dry land. Taya sat in silence, her eyes gazing far away. Where I come from, people died too. But for freedom, he nodded, his gray eyes carrying the sadness of a sky after a storm. No more needed to be said. They both understood each had lost a part of themselves in wars. No one ever really won. At night, wind swept through the cracks in the cabin door, carrying the scent of dry earth and scorched grass. Taya continued sewing her torn dress. Her hands were large and strong, but the needle moved in clean, careful lines. Cole sat by the window, sharpening a knife. The sound of metal ringing softly, blending with the chirping of crickets. No music was needed. That alone became a quiet symphony of peace. One time, as she brought in firewood, he handed her an old cloth hat. The sun's harsh out here. Wear this. She took it, gave a small nod. For the first time, their eyes held each other for more than a few seconds. No sparks, no drama, just two wounded souls finding each other in silence. Day after day, they lived like that quietly, simply. The cow grew fatter. Green shoots began to sprout behind the cabin. Cole started to whistle softly while working, and now and then, Taya sang in Apache, her voice low and haunting, like wind through canyon walls. The world beyond remained loud and restless, but here, only the rhythm of life and the breath of the land remained. A rare kind of peace, but the West never let peace last for too long. Somewhere, on the outskirts of Copper Bend, 3 drunken cowboys were gathering, their threats rising with the smoke of cigarettes and the thin slice of moonlight. A new storm was coming. That afternoon, the sky over Copper Bend hung heavy. Dark clouds gathered in the west, signaling a storm on its way. Cole had just finished putting away his tools in the barn when he heard it, the sound of hooves pounding from afar. Sharp metal, striking stone. Fast and furious. 3 figures appeared over the ridge, riding hard toward the cabin. It was the same 3 drunken cowboys who had stirred trouble the week before. The bald one yelled out, "Come on out, Danner. Let us see that Apache you're hiding." Cole stepped onto the porch. He did not reach for his gun. He simply placed a hand on the wooden beam, his eyes cold as steel. "Leave my land." I won't say it again. But the liquor had made them wild. One of them cracked a whip. Another jumped off his horse and slammed a fist straight into Cole's face. The blow was hard enough to send him crashing down the steps. Blood dripped from his mouth. But his gaze stayed calm. "How's it feel to get a taste of what they did to us?" The man sneered, laughing. The door flew open. Taya stepped out tall, bare-shouldered, black hair whipping in the wind, muscles tense beneath sun-browned skin. Lightning flashed, catching the glint in her eyes black as obsidian. No one had time to react. She stormed down the steps, grabbed the bald man by the collar, and lifted him like a sack of grain. With a swift toss, his body hit the ground and slid through the mud. The second man raised his gun, but she turned, drove a fierce kick straight into his gut, sending the weapon flying. A dry snap crack. As his knee buckled, the last man drew a knife and charged, screaming. Taya sidestepped, seized his wrist, twisted it with brutal precision using his own blade. The knife clattered to the ground. She pinned him to the dirt, her breath hot against his neck. Had enough? Silence. Only the sound of rain tapping on the wooden roof. All 3 men, trembling, scrambled to their feet and fled on horseback without looking back, leaving behind a trail of water, mud, and shame. Taya turned around. Cole stood under the porch, blood mixing with rain on his lips, his eyes wide with awe and respect. She knelt and offered her hand. "You all right?" He took it, her hand smaller, but firm and warm. "I am now," Cole said, his voice hoarse. The rain came down hard, cold, loud, washing away blood, dust, and every unspoken divide. In the downpour, they stood there, a man who had survived the battlefield, and a woman once sold like property, looking at each other, both understanding. There was no longer anyone who needed saving. From now on, they only had to stand together against whatever the world would bring. The rain that night did not stop. The sound of falling water drummed steadily on the wooden roof, blending with the soft breathing of 2 people inside the cabin. Cole sat by the fire, his shirt stained with blood, one cheek swollen and bruised. Taya knelt beside him, her broad shoulders still damp from the rain, black hair tangled, falling across one cheek. She held a basin of water, wrung out a cloth, and began cleaning his wounds with slow, careful movements. Cole winced as the water touched torn skin. "I should have had my gun ready," he said quietly. Taya did not look up. She simply replied, "You were ready. By staying." That sentence stilled the entire room. The wind whistled through the doorframe, carrying her words into the night. Taya set the cloth down, then looked directly into his eyes. In hers, there was no more guardedness, only a quiet kind of courage, the kind that never needed to shout. "I used to think there was no place left for me," she said. Her voice low but trembling. "Sold off, called names like I was an animal. I thought I had died, until you gave me the choice to stay or leave." She paused, breathing gently. Firelight flickered across her sun-darkened face, casting shadows over the faint scars around her wrists. "I stayed," she whispered. "Not because I owed you, but because I wanted to." Cole looked at her for a long moment. He set his cup down, then let his rough, calloused hand rest gently over hers. "You've never been a burden," he said, his voice hoarse and slow, as if each word had traveled through a life full of loss. A long pause filled only by the soft crackling of the fire and the quiet breaths of two people who had grown used to silence. Taya lowered her head, resting her forehead lightly against his. Warmth spread between them in the dark. Outside, the rain began to ease. On the roof, the last drops fell like the beat of a slowed heart. Cole held her large but gentle hand, giving it a quiet squeeze. He had never believed life still had anything left to begin again. But in that moment, in the warmth of the fire and her breath, he knew he had found it. Two souls, once shattered, now sitting side by side. With no vows, no promises, only respect and a rare peace like the morning after a storm. Dawn came slowly after the night of rain. The first light crept through the window, slid across the damp wooden floor, and stopped at the coat hanging on the wall where raindrops still fell. Slow and steady, Cole Danner opened his eyes, hearing the familiar footsteps on the porch, heavy, solid, certain. Taya was tending the fire again. Her black hair, damp with morning dew, clung to her neck. The muscles in her shoulders stood out in the early light. She poured coffee, steam curling up into the cold air. "Drink it before the sun gets too hot," she said, her voice low, calm, and sure. Cole sat up, took the cup, and watched her place cornbread on the table. They did not say much. They did not have to. Between them, silence was no longer a wall. It had become a roof. Outside, the red earth still held the marks of rain. Young green weeds pushed up between the wagon ruts, proof of something hard to believe. Even the driest ground can grow, if someone is willing to water it with kindness. Cole walked out to the stable, tightening ropes, wiping down the saddle. Taya followed, wearing the buckskin dress she had sewn herself, the hem still marked with clumsy stitches. The leather boots he gave her made a soft sound on the wet ground. She helped him lead the horse. Her strong hands rested on the animal's neck, gently smoothing its mane. The horse, once wild, now stood calm. "He listens to you," Cole said, smiling faintly. "Maybe he knows I'm stronger," she replied, a small spark in her eyes. They both laughed, quiet, but genuine, like two people who had survived a land of smoke and guns and had finally found their way back to laughter. As the sun climbed higher, Cole stood on the porch, watching her, the tall, muscled, sun-darkened Apache woman who had once been sold with a cow, now watering her own vegetable garden. He slowly put on his hat and murmured, "Not for her, but for himself. No one belongs to anyone. We only belong where we're respected." Taya looked up, sunlight catching in her deep black eyes. She said nothing. She only nodded, as if she understood that what he had just spoken was not just a thought, but the quietest kind of vow the West could offer. By noon, smoke curled up from the cabin's chimney, melting into the clear sky. And back in Copper Bend, people still whispered. There was a rancher who once bought a cow and brought home an Apache woman, and no one ever saw her leave. They never understood, and they did not need to, because out there, in the land of wind and dust, two souls who had lost everything found each other not through promises, but by surviving each day together. My friend, in that scorched western land, where wind and blood once taught people how to survive. Kindness remains the only thing that keeps a heart beating right. A simple gesture, a glance without judgment sometimes, that is all it takes to save a soul that thought it was forever lost. Because love and kindness do not change the world in a day, but they can heal an entire lifetime.